Hi, and welcome to this edition of B.E.P Talks. I want to say right up front, not a light topic that we're talking about today. This is kind of serious business, so relevant in today's world. We hear it all the time. We have a very special guest, Cristi Bundukamara, who is an expert in the area and is going to help us to become mentally strong and how to survive challenging times, trauma, loss, grief. Cristi, welcome to B.E.P Talks.
Thank you so much for having me.
Such a pleasure. As I said, and I wanted to be very honest, not a light topic that we're talking about, but a very positive topic in the sense that you have solutions towards something that can really be very devastating in an individual's life, in communities, in society at large. I think you would agree with that. Yeah. So we're talking about big things. We're talking about mental strength, mental empowerment, how you get yourself lined up to deal with anything that the world is throwing at you whenever it's throwing it at you.
Yeah.
And we all know that those things can come at any time. Sometimes they come in flourishes. So again, I'm so excited to have you on B.E.P Talks today. Tell us a little bit about your personal background and how you came to be so knowledgeable about the issue and the solution.
So I'm a psychiatric practitioner by trade. So I went to school for 6 years to be a psychiatric nurse practitioner and then a doctorate in healthcare education, all of which before I had to navigate my own grief and trauma. So, I have this educational background. I'm very good at taking care of others. And it started, practicing as a psychiatric nurse practitioner and realizing that I had an opportunity to adopt children. So I ended up adopting 5 children over the course of a couple years and have 2 biological children of my own. And we had this great racial family. I mean, my husband is from Africa. Some of our children are Cuban, some are white, some are black. Our biological children are mixed. I took care of my father-in-law, who is actually like a true African. And so we really had this amazing household of this, interracial, bringing, people together. And then the first tragedy hit. In 2005, my son Johnny died in a drowning accident. And we were on family vacation in Kentucky. Things were just starting to mesh as a family because when we adopted these children, they were older. They were 7, 8, 10, 14, 16. So they came to us with, some trauma and some attachment issues. And we were just beginning to bond as a family. And Johnny was part of a 3-child sibling group. So I had his 2 biological sisters. And I remember telling them that they were safe. They had been physically and sexually abused in their past. And when we adopted them, we said, you're safe. And so to have Johnny die so suddenly in this drowning accident, in the time where we were just beginning to be happy, and little did I know that would be the first trauma that I had to endure personally and that the family had to endure. Shortly after that, a year after Johnny's death, my son Reggie began having what we call catastrophic epilepsy, that no matter what the doctors did, they could not stop his seizures. His seizures were so intense, he could have 12 grand mal seizures in a day and not be conscious the whole day. This went on for about 3 years before they found what the cause was. And the cause is a very rare neurodegenerative condition called DRPLA. And this disorder causes atrophy in the brain, and it's genetic. So either my husband or myself have it. So we tested my other biological child and my husband, myself, and my daughter Maya has DRPLA, and my husband has DRPLA. And here we are navigating all of this grief and trauma over the course of 15 years. We fought for my son's life until he passed away at age 17 in 2016.
Mhm.
And so, all of my energy at that time was put into trying to save my son, using my academic knowledge and just my desire for self-improvement to keep going. And that's when I started Mentally Strong, and I started helping other people with this technique that we call the Mentally Strong method. In 2021, my daughter passed away in her sleep, where, from sudden unexpected death and epilepsy. Although she had epilepsy, she was not sick like my son. And so it was a huge shock. And now my husband is on hospice. So when we talk about grief, unfortunately, I'm an expert in all types of grief, right? I had this sudden accidental loss, my son in 2005. I have a son diagnosed with a terminal condition that we fought for 10 years for his life. And, all of the grief that's associated with what's not coming, like he's never going to marry, he's never going to do this, all of that grief. And then again, that kind of grief with my daughter, but the sudden death in her sleep when she was not sick. And now the anticipatory grief of my husband on hospice. And so, unfortunately, I am an expert in grief, not just because I have experienced it, but because I am actually processing it. I am actually feeling the pain, learning how to be truly resilient, not just pushing through and saying I can do it, right? But truly resilient.
You've kind of taken my breath away in a sense that I can't imagine the loss of one child, but three.
Yeah.
And over a course of so many years, I applaud you. You adopted 5 children, which has to be one of the most beautiful gifts that one human being could give to another. And as you say, your goal to make them feel safe.
Yeah.
And I believe that you did, because now, just for clarity, the 2 children that passed away, not the child that drowned, but the 2 children that passed away, were those your biological children?
Yeah.
Those were your biological children. The son that died in the drowning was an adopted child.
Correct.
Here you're kind of coming together. You're telling the adopted children you're safe, and yet your biological children were in harm's way, and you never knew it.
Never knew it.
I have to say, God has a very high opinion of you and your family. And I've said that to many people when you hear overwhelming stories like this, that when you're given that much to deal with, it's because you can. And to create what you call the mentally strong method, and we're going to talk about that, had to be very cathartic for you and your family, but that you generously didn't keep it just for yourself and your family, because you clearly are a giver. You adopted 5 children, thank goodness. So my heart aches for you, and I applaud you at the same time for your resilience, for continuing to make your way through, because you don't get over those things. They still continue to live with you every day. Tell us about the Mentally Strong method, what it's all about, how it has served you and your family, and how you use it to serve others.
Yeah. So it started probably in the midst of about 5 years into my son being sick and feeling completely overwhelmed. And I remember very distinctly, who do you call when you feel overwhelmed? You call your mom, right?
Your mom, yeah.
And I called my mom, and my poor mom doesn't know how I deal with what I've dealt with. And she has been the best that she can, but she was like, well, maybe you should journal. And I don't think in sentences. I have a little bit of ADD. I'm all over the place. And I thought, I don't really journal, but let me just sit down with a piece of paper. And I started doing these bubbles. And we now call this a thought map. And what I would do is in these bubbles, I would put all of the different thoughts that I was having. And then I realized if I asked myself deeper questions, right? So although in modern day society, we don't have time for psychoanalytical therapy, right? Like where you go deep into your childhood. However, we know that our childhood impacts who we are today.
Sure.
And so I would ask myself these questions. So let's say I was really anxious and overwhelmed, and I would write down all the things that I was anxious and overwhelmed about. And then I would be like, when have I felt like this in the past? When did I feel like this in my childhood? And how does this impact my relationship with God? And all of these bubbles would be on this piece of paper. And I would be able to look at it and meditate on it. And then I realized that's a really messy piece of paper.
And that's my life. That's my life.
Well, and that's how my brain is always going. But it's also exhausting to have your brain going in all of those directions, right? And so I would meditate on these words on the paper, and then I would start organizing it. And I would organize it into different categories because there's some things that we can do something about, and there's some things that we can't. And grief, we can't really do anything about. We can process it. But I was in the midst of grief, but I couldn't like stop and process. Like I had to continue raising my children. I had a
You're the mom. You're the mom. Mom has to go on.
You have to keep going. And so I would put them in these categories and make it into bite-sized pieces. And I did this on myself over the course of 10 years. And when Reggie died, I started my autobiography of my story. And I also started like getting this on paper. What was I actually doing with myself? Because it does work. It does work to make these things bite-sized. And so in 2016, 2017, I was able to get it in writing. And it's basically 4 elements. The first is that thought map where you're putting these things down on paper. You're asking yourself those 4 questions. What makes me feel like this now? What made me feel like this in the past? Did I ever feel like this as a child? And how does this impact my spiritual relationship? And this is super important because in mental health, we've separated spiritual health in a fear of proselytization. Like we're so afraid that someone's going to try to tell us what to believe that we stopped talking about spiritual health. And I have gone through what I call pretty significant spiritual conflict. So when I adopted those 5 children, I told them that they were safe. We are the strong Christian family. We, read all these parenting books about how, if you just do A and B, then your children will love God and everything will be great and you'll be protected. And that wasn't happening in my life. No matter what I did, I wasn't getting the result. And you see this not only in Christian teaching, but you see this in manifestation and spirituality. If you just, you can control your environment. And here I was doing all the right things, and my son was getting sicker and sicker. My daughter was diagnosed with the same thing. My husband was diagnosed with the same thing. My teenage girls, who were Johnny's biological sister, began to rebel at 14, 15, 16, and all of their sexual trauma came out in their rebellion, and just all of these horrible things that I had to navigate. I'm sorry. I'm going to need to take a sip of water.
Yeah, take a drink. I have to too. There's a lot going on here.
So the thought map, then identify and organize, take those things apart. I think a lot of times what happens when somebody is going through grief and trauma, everything gets enmeshed. Their triggers, their negative self-talk, their anxiety, their behaviors and choices, and everything is like this just ball of emotion rather than, pieces that they can do something about. And we can do something about the way that we talk to ourselves. But we also need to process our grief. And we also
But
need
isn't it so easy, Cristi, when you're going through, and again, I can't imagine, and it was years, you could just about, I don't want to say healing because I don't believe that's possible when you lose a child. You just learn how to go on. That your self-worth, that it's very easy to start to punish yourself, doubt your own worth. Is it a punishment? What did I do wrong? Those are very natural things, but you and I both know, you as a professional, we both know that that's not what it is. But it's very easy, is it not, to just sit and wonder and ponder and think about that.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, every day is passing. So by you staying busy and doing that version of journaling and your thought map, that kept your mind going, it kept your spirit alive. I think that was great advice because moms always give great advice, right? Was that very much part of you moving forward?
Give you a sense of control. Oftentimes, we feel when something horrible happens to us, we feel like a victim, like we don't have control. And I didn't have control. And many people who have experienced trauma and grief have no control over that. Even though as a mother, you do deal with the guilt and blame, like, oh, I should have been sleeping with her. I should have taken him to the hospital. I should have been with Johnny at the river, right? Should have.
Yeah.
But then it goes back to that spiritual conflict of truly believing what we say we believe of an eternal soul, that it's really not over. But it's important to separate the spiritual conflict from the grief, because otherwise it just gets enmeshed together and we can't get out of the hole, right? So we have 10 categories in the Mental Trauma Method. Grief is one of them. Trauma is one of them. Grief, your goal in grief is to feel the pain. None of us want to feel pain, right? So we don't feel pain. We want to fix it, right? We feel pain, we want to fix it. You can't fix grief. The loss is already gone. Right? So you have to embrace the pain, and then the frequency and intensity in which you have to feel that pain will decrease over time. You can grow a life from that, but that pain is a part of who you are now.
Yeah.
But also the goal of grief is to cherish the relationship. And it's a hard thing to say. And it took me, a good year of knowing that I needed to get to this point of being able to say, I would not change a thing. If God came to me and said, I'm going to give you 2 children and they're going to die, my immature self at 25 when I got pregnant would have been, no. But now I would say yes. And even, I always say, like, if I knew Reggie and Maya were sick, I wouldn't have adopted children. Like that wouldn't have been responsible, right? Because, you're taking on more responsibility by adopting children. But now I would have nothing if I hadn't adopted children, right? Because I lost both of my biological children, and I'll lose my husband to the same disorder. And so, but I have children, I have grandchildren because of not knowing
what you didn't know then. So I know. It's all wanting to, like you said, to control. So I guess accepting that which we cannot control. And God's timeline is always going to be God's timeline. And we can't control that. Doesn't make it easy. It almost sounds impossible, to be honest with you. But you obviously are an incredibly strong, spiritual based person of great giving. And as you say, that the adopted children are your life. But you wouldn't give up them. I know you wouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And nor, of course, the joy of having your biological children. So how do you implement the your program, the mentally strong method? How do you share that with other people?
So we have an online course, in different levels that could include some coaching with it. And I'll tell you, I'll just start with someone doing a thought map and going through the whole 4 elements the first time. And then you learn to, I'm having a bad day. I'm a little more emotional than usual, or I was easily triggered. Let me stop and do a thought map and figure out, what do I need to do, right? We all have lots of things that we could be working on for ourselves. What is coming up as priority? And oftentimes, and I see this a lot with women, is the negative self-talk, the way that we talk to ourselves, not the things that happen to us, right? And so, for example, on a bad day, I could say, oh, I'm a horrible mother. I let these things happen. I should have done this. That I have control of, right? I don't have control of the fact that I've lost my children. But then I can also remind myself of the spiritual growth that has happened since losing my children, and my better understanding of our eternal souls. And so there's gifts that come with this pain. And that's what you have to be telling yourself, that whole gratitude thing, but gratitude that you believe. So I feel like a lot of people talk about, manifestation and prayer and positive self-talk in a way that is not necessarily realistic. Like, just to say, oh, you should be happy that you had children at all doesn't help, right? But for me to, go through this process and say, you know what, I have an eternal connection with my children. I will be able to have that feeling again, and that the soul, this is not the end, right? But I also had to go through a process of that, even though I intellectually knew that before.
Right.
It's different when you've experienced the pain and processed it properly.
How could it not be? But it is a process, and it is one that you have to, I would imagine, allow yourself, maybe force yourself to go through. And that's just part of the human condition. What we don't understand, we may never understand, but we can still accept, we can still acknowledge, we can still be grateful. And I don't want to make that sound trivial in any way to someone like yourself who has experienced the loss of children. So the mentally strong method, it's not limited, if you will, to people who have lost a child. It's just about strength for anybody. The process is kind of the same, right? The process, the loss, the self-doubt, the depression, the anxiety.
Yeah.
It's all the same. It's just the issue is different.
Yeah. We talk about mental strength being an attribute that we respect in people, but we don't teach it anywhere. And many people who I've met who have demonstrated mental strength have been through, horrible things in their life and have overcome. They don't necessarily know how they did it, right? They just pushed through. They did it. They figured it out. And I have been blessed to be able to know how I did it, so that I can share that with other people.
Yes. I imagine that some people think they've gotten through it, but maybe they've just buried it in order to be present on a daily basis.
There's one very famous person on mental strength that is using physical activity to like push through rather than really process.
Oh, I'm sure there's a whole lot more than one, famous or not, who, find, what would I say, they're pacifiers, whether it's in alcohol or any kind of, bad habit or addiction, which is probably part of their personality, which I imagine you could view somehow as self-punishment along the way.
Yeah.
Like you say, you went through like, what could I have done? Where wasn't I when I could have been? And that's just the human condition, Cristi. That's what we have to, that's why we have to get to the other side to understand all of these things. So in some way, your beautiful children are all steps ahead of you. Not enough time in this world, but they already have understandings that we don't yet have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. What has been your, in coaching other people, helping people to become aware of their own mental health? First, you have to be aware of it. You have to understand that there is an issue. Do you find that people are reluctant to accept, to acknowledge? Do we want to say, oh, everything's fine?
I think with me, I think people are very open and vulnerable. Probably because I start with vulnerability and people, that allows people to feel safe. I think as a culture, we are opening up to it. And there's lots of kind of anti-stigma movements around mental health concerns.
Yes.
But on the downside of that, we are creating this victim, I am depressed, I am anxious, rather than I'm struggling with depression. I'm struggling with anxiety. And oftentimes, so I have a full psychiatric clinic here. We prescribe medication, do counseling, and oftentimes people are coming for me to fix it, right? I have depression, I want an antidepressant medication. And we do a lot of medication. We see very, true mental health concerns here.
Sure.
But as a culture, I think there's this line of you're either mentally ill or you're mentally healthy. And that's not true. It's a continuum, right? And if we don't embrace the journey of mental strength, we could end up on that side of mental illness. I'll give an example of one of my theories of PTSD, especially in men. So most of the men that I treat with PTSD related to a war situation, combat PTSD, have childhood trauma that they never dealt with, right? So they thought they knew how to do it. We call this a compartmentalized brain, right? Trauma happens to me, I put it in a box and I put it away. Men are better at doing this than women, right? We have a little bit more emotional connection to everything, but they'll put it in a box and pretend like it never happened and go be the best soldier that they can be, right? And that's what we want them to be in combat, right? We can't have you bringing up your childhood stuff in combat, right? But what happens is we all have a threshold of what we can't take anymore. And so when you have previous trauma and you put that in a box and you've never really learned how to be resilient, you've just learned to push through. The more trauma you experience, at some point you're going to meet your threshold. Yeah. And when you meet your threshold, all of those boxes are going to open. And then you don't know how to deal with all of that. Unlike me, who I have an emotionally connected brain, and I've been dealing with my emotions since I was a young girl, but often told I was too emotional, too sensitive, overreacting, right? I think women get this a lot. And I had to learn how to somewhat compartmentalize. Like, you can't be wearing your emotions on your sleeve and be productive, right? So there's a balance between this super emotional and everything is connected and the compartmentalized brain that's not dealing with anything. A strong brain is somewhere in the middle where you can put it away and, I can take time to do my grief in my home and, make sure that I am processing my grief, but I can also stand up in front of hundreds of people and tell my story. And yes, I get choked up and there's emotion to it, but I can do it because I've learned to process it in private so that I can share.
And
right?
you understand it, right? You understand it. I want to go back to the comments you made that people are saying that they're either, emotionally strong or they're completely not. And I think that probably the vast majority of us live in one of those shades of gray between here and there. But you said people are quick to make themselves a victim. It's become kind of a catch-all thing in society, in politics, in crime, and how we deal with crime these days, that, oh, if you did something like that, you have to be mentally ill, you have to be mentally whatever. And maybe you are, but has it become kind of an escape that people can just declare that when it's really not?
Yeah, I think mental health is very complicated, and we have a very polarized culture, right? You're either pro God against God. You're either pro gun against guns. You're either pro,
Right.
Whatever the issue is, right? It's always so bipolar when the reality is everything is gray, and we've taken away some of the personal responsibility
Yes,
to your
yes,
own mental health journey.
yes.
I always say we are all on a mental health journey, whether you admit it or not. And there's lots, especially men, are saying, "Oh, I'm not on a mental health journey." Well, you're on one. You're just maybe not actively participating. Maybe you're
Yeah.
not growing.
Right.
You're on one, and you may be stuck. There's people
Yeah.
who are stuck. But I also, when we blame mental health on all of the societal problems, we're also saying that it's not a community issue. One of the, I just read a book, and it's hard for me to recommend books because, again, this book had a lot of really good nuggets in it, but they were completely anti-medication, which I don't think is fair, right?
Right.
Because when you're anti-medication, like wherever somebody is, whatever they need to get help right now, they need to feel free to do that in this
Yes.
journey,
Yes.
possibly getting better. And there's
It's like physical pain. The first thing you have to do is get out of the pain. Right.
Yeah, right.
So you can move forward.
Go to physical therapy, and then you can try to rebuild your muscle, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There is a process. There's a process. Cristi, you mentioned, standing up in front of audiences of hundreds of people. Who are typically in your audiences?
I would say my audience is about 80% women, 20% men, that are employed, that are working, that are on this self-development journey, that are trying to just be a better human being. Almost everyone has been through something.
Yeah, true. True, some more than others, yeah. And as I said, it seems to come in flourishes sometimes.
Right.
Wow.
And just knowing, having confidence in how do I deal with that, right? Just like some people have successfully gotten through some pretty significant issues in their life. They don't know how they did it. So if something else happened, they'd be starting over. Like they don't know how they did it. And the mentally strong method can be summarized in 3 words: think, organize, choose.
Learn to organize, choose. Okay.
Yep. Learn to think through your problem, learn to organize them, and make choices in line with what you say you want. Oftentimes, we're not making choices in line with what we say we want. And, we're just talking negatively to ourselves, or we're just, continuing the same old patterns.
Right.
And that's right. Helps you get out of those patterns. That's why we ask about how you felt like this in the past.
Yeah, it made me think, it's like people say, I'll do anything to lose weight except change the way I eat or exercise. That's not going to work. You've got to go through the right steps, right? There are steps, logical steps. I can talk to you forever. I just think it is so wonderful that you exist to be of great value to other people, and certainly that they don't have to have gone through the trauma, let alone 3 times, that you and your family have gone through, and that it was so many years, it was stretched out over, so it was constant, and yet you're still dealing with it. And my heart breaks for you, because you said your husband is in hospice care now, and
we will all be together again one day.
yes,
Yeah.
I want to give people the opportunity to connect with you. Excuse me. I'm one of those empaths.
Okay.
I held out for a long time. I want to give people the opportunity to connect with you. So I put up a link right here, Cristi.
Okay, perfect.
Everybody can go right here to connect with you. And you don't, let me ask you, do people have to be physically present with you in order to gain the benefits of your knowledge and professional experience and wisdom?
No, I think for professional coaches and therapists, I think just taking one of our courses allows you to see how the method is beneficial. We let coaches and professionals use it professionally for nominal fees. It really depends on where you are and whether you want help or not. So we have 3 packages. The first is just an online course. So there's not any, direct interaction. Then the second would be some group coaching with, going through the course. And the third would be, I'm not doing well. I need to sit with somebody one-on-one. And that does include some time with me where I do the first and the last appointment, so that we make sure that we are wrapping this up together. I do think, especially women who have lost a child, and I know you're struggling. And, I am putting out a grief documentary soon. It will not be public for a couple of years because we are going to be applying to film festivals and stuff, but we'll be doing some private showings, and we have the grief workbook. The grief course is coming out soon. So just make sure you get on our email list, but also look through the website and the different ways to learn the strong method. I have a YouTube channel with over 3,000 subscribers, over 300 videos, a lot of grief videos that just talk about how do we really do this.
Yeah, how do we really do this? One day at a time, one step at a time. The important word you said is choice.
Yeah.
It is a choice, and you've now given people options.
Yeah.
Make the choice, make the one that fits best for where you are, what you're dealing with, and please reach out to Cristi Bundukamara, who can speak with such personal experience and her own trauma and grief. And if a woman who has lost 3 children and still dealing with her husband's illness can get through it, I have to guess that most of us can, if we make the right choice and just get started. So please connect with Cristi. Cristi, I thank you so much for being a guest on B.E.P Talks, for all that you have shared with us from such a personal perspective. I admire your strength more than I can even express. Thank you so much. God bless you, your family, and thank you again for being a very special guest on B.E.P Talks. I know that you will be helping so many people. Thank you. I want to say to our viewing audience, thank you. Again, please connect with Cristi. We always say, may the best always be yet to come. And when it comes to your mental strength, I truly mean that from the bottom of my heart. Connect with us on B.E.P Talks. Come and share your story. Help others. It doesn't have to, it will never be the same story as Cristi's, please God. And until we talk again, God bless. Thank you, Cristi.
Thank you.